So the Psukim tell us in Yehoshua that when Klal Yisrael entered Eretz Yisrael, they hadn't brought a Karban Pesach in a long time, the Paschal lamb, because they didn't have a Milah in the Midbar for a long time. And one of the conditions of eating the Karban Pesach is you have to be Gamal, you have to have a circumcision. So one of the things they had, except of course Sheva Levi, then whatever the whole discussion why they didn't have Milah, there was no Ruach Saphonis, it was a danger, but the bottom line is they didn't have a Milah, they couldn't partake of the Karban Pesach, so finally after the many years in the Midbar, they had a circumcision and wanted to partake in the Karban Pesach.
So what is it, the Ruach Saphonis, what did you say?
Yeah, there's a certain northern wind they were talking about where which they had for refuah.
Okay.
However, it's mashma from the psukim. If you read the psukim in Yehoshua, it seems they did not eat matzah that year. They did Karban Pesach, but it seems they did not fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. It's not written explicitly. Some might claim they did, but the simple reading of the psukim and the way Tosfos learns in Kedushin is the Jewish people did not eat matzah that year for the Leil Pesach.
It's the first in the middle.
Yeah, and the question is why not? Matzah is a mitzvah min Torah, so clearly it already applied already. It wasn't some mitzvah given later on in Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvah mitzvahs atuliyas ba'aretz, it wasn't given like 14 years later.
They had no wheat?
Well, right, so perhaps why didn't they have any wheat?
They were eating mun for 40 years.
Well, actually, right. So actually, when did the mun stop falling?
When Moshe died.
Right, so on Zayin Adar, the mun stopped falling. And usually, the mun didn't last too long. That was part of the deal. That you shouldn't get too comfortable, forget about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, every day you had to eat your mun. If not, it spoiled and disappeared. A nace happened, a miracle happened, that after Moshe died, the mun that fell lasted for a long time. It lasted until the second day of Pesach. Why the second day of Pesach? Why not the first? Why not the 10th? Okay, there isn't a 10th. But why not after Pesach? Why specifically did the mun have to last until the second day of Pesach? So there's a halacha called Chadash and Yoshon. You may or may not be familiar with. And in New York, there are plenty of Yoshon bakeries, Yoshon pizza shops.
Flour.
Apparently in Toronto also they have, but they don't necessarily have it on the windows. The COR has a list. Here, Isaac's might be, different bakeries may have Yoshon, meaning old flour. Chadash means new. So the halacha is, the psukim in the Chumash, that any grain that took root last year does not become permitted to eat until the second day of Pesach. When they had a temple, it was the Karban Omer. By bringing the Karban, they were permitted. Today, no Karban to the day itself. The second day of Pesach comes, you're permitted to eat from the old, from Chadash turns to Yoshon, you're permitted to eat the old grain. It's a discussion. Rabbi in Lakewood, at least he said it 20 years ago, that all flour in America, I don't know about Canada, was Yoshon. He claimed that until after they went through the process and put it away, he ended up using that. It was okay. Obviously, others either disagreed with that or they were going to be machmir anyway. And the briskers, the Soloveitchiks, especially machmir. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, who was here, was only a Yoshon. And as the Rav pointed out, if you're going to take on a chumrah, that's the one to take on. He thinks it's more than a chumrah. He thinks everyone should be doing it.
What's wrong with young flour?
No, it's based on the psukim. There's nothing like poisonous or anything like that. It's just one of the halachas we'll get into. But that it's only wrong because the Torah says you have to wait for the Karban Omer.
Okay. It's because that's a din in Eretz Yisrael, but outside Eretz Yisrael maybe.
Right. So therefore, so there is. It has to do with there. There are a lot more kulas in chutzlar. It's about eating, having chadash. We're not eating Yoshon.
Oh.
It does have to do with that, and that's a whole discussion. It's a sveka maybe, but it's not for now. So either way, the Jewish people did not fulfill the simple reading. Some claim they brought flour with them from elsewhere and they did eat matzah. But the simple reading of the psukim and the way Tosfos learns is the Jewish people did not fulfill the mitzvah of matzah that year because they didn't have any, they couldn't make matzah because the flour, they couldn't get the old grain wasn't going to be permitted until the second day of Yontif. That's one day too late because Leil Pesach was the night before, so they couldn't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. So the Tosfos quotes in the Yerushalmi and has a famous question. So what? I agree. I'm familiar with the prohibition of Chadash, and I'm familiar with the mitzvah of matzah. And I'm familiar with another principle we've discussed many times, and I'm sure we'll continue many more times to discuss. There's a principle in the Gemara of aseh doche lo saseh. We have a principle that there's a conflict between a positive commandment and a negative commandment. Of course, there are many details in between, but the rule is, if you have a positive mitzvah in conflict with the negative commandment, so aseh doche lo saseh, the aseh, the positive commandment, pushes off the negative commandment. What's the classical example of aseh docha lo saseh?
Mila, I suppose.
Mila, you mean saras? Or?
No, bris Mila.
Yeah, go.
Shabbos.
Yeah, okay, it might not be the classical example, but okay. The classical example is, it's true, we do Mila on Shabbos.
Shofar and Rosh Hashanah?
That's also, it's not the classic. The classic example is tzitzis or Big Day Kahuna. The Big Day Kahuna that the Kohanim were able to wear shatnez in the Big Day Kahuna, because the aseh beat out, or we have kilayim and asitzis, we have shatnez, we have wool and linen. So the aseh of tzitzis pushes off the negative. That's why even though today some people wear tchelas or think they're wearing tchelas, but nevertheless no one goes that far to wear wool and linen. No one goes that far to think that vadai indefinitely fulfilled. Because the problem is if you're wrong, you're violating the law of shatnez. So that's the classical example anyway. But yeah, there are many other examples of aseh docha lo saseh. So the question is, let the mitzvahs aseh of matzah push off the prohibition of Chadash. It's true that generally you can't eat until the second day of Pesach, until you can't eat the old grain until the second day of Pesach. But so what? I'm doing a mitzvah here. Let's the mitzvahs aseh of matzah, be'erev tochu matzos, push off the prohibition of eating Chadash. That's the Yerushalmi's question. Tosfos quotes in Kedushin and Daf Lamed Ches. So comes along Tosfos and he gives two answers. Each one we could spend a lot of time on. There have been questions on about this. Well, let's get what he says first. So A1 is, Tosfos says, you're right. Normally we have a principle of aseh docha lo saseh, but not in this case. Why is this case different? So Tosfos writes, because here we're talking about an aseh kodem hadibor and a lav achar hadibor. In English, meaning the mitzvah of matzah, the erev tochu matzos, was given to the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Kodem, before the Torah was given on Har Sinai. So that's the mitzvah aseh kodem Sinai, and the lav of Chadash was given afterwards. So Tosfos writes, Norm, when do we say aseh docha lo saseh? When they're both equal. Well, let's assume they're both achar Har Sinai. But when one's before Har Sinai and the lav is after, the aseh isn't strong enough to push off the prohibition. In other words, the Pnei Yoshua explains the reason. In general, Pnei Yoshua, he dedicated his life to answer up Tosfos' questions on Rashi, because he was stuck in a fire, he was going to die. He writes this in his Hakdama, in his introduction, and he promised God that if he saved me, I'll spend my life dedicating, answering up Tosfos' questions on Rashi. And sure enough, he got out of the fire, and hence the Pnei Yoshua. But either way, so he explains why here, because why do we say aseh docha lo saseh? And by the way, it's the Ramban in Parashas Yisro who says because aseh represents ava, love, and love, refraining from negative commandments, represents fear, yira. So we have a general rule that serving God out of ava, out of love, is a higher level, is a greater level than serving God out of fear. That's the reason behind aseh docha lo saseh. So either way, so he points out that if we're talking about an aseh achar hadibur, so you know, so when you say you're doing this mitzvah, it's built into the package. You know all the negative commandments. You know you have the 613 mitzvahs in front of you. So when I say you do an aseh, it's built in the pros and cons. And we say the aseh even beats out the negative, but you can't really make that argument against an aseh before Har Sinai because there was no negatives yet. So maybe the only time I say to do the mitzvahs aseh is when there's no conflict. But perhaps if there was a negative commandment, we wouldn't say aseh kodem Har Sinai is docha one after. So that's what Tosfos writes. The reason why they couldn't eat matzah that year, the mitzvah of matzah beats out the prohibition of chadash. A1 is because it's a weaker aseh. Again, that principle that Tosfos is saying isn't so simple. If you look at the beginning of the Gemara Yavamas, it seems to imply the reverse. That perhaps an aseh kodem Sinai is stronger, but that's not for now, but it's throwing it out there. Next, A2. Second answer, Tosfos disagrees obviously with the first answer. Obviously you'll hear when I tell you what it is. Because Tosfos says no, even an aseh kodem Har Sinai is docha an aseh afterwards. We do say, we go with the if that's the case then why can't I eat my matzah? Why couldn't the Jewish people eat the matzah? So Tosfos says, Kizayis Rishon Atu Kizayis Sheni, which means that you're right. What is the mitzvah on the night of Pesach? Again, there's a whole discussion how much you have to eat. That's not for now. But the mitzvah is a Kizayis. You eat a kazayis matzah, you fulfill your mitzvah of the erev tochu matzah. So he says, you're right. They could have ate, if they just would have stopped at one kazayis, then you're right, they couldn't take the matzah from the chadash and make it and eat it. But the concern was they're going to be very hungry. One kazayis wasn't going to cut it, and they're going to end up eating many. Kazayis sheni, and Ali had shlishi, ravi. So the concern, so we do say aseh docha lo saseh normally, but that's only on the first kazayas. But since the concern was they're going to eat much more, hence, so we didn't want to even permit the first kazayas. That's the second answer of Tosfos. The problem with that answer is, or the question on it is a famous Vilna Gaon with the Rambam, and that's why some people are machmir to eat shmura matzah the whole Pesach. Of course, how you define shmura matzah is a separate, maybe matzah pshutis is also shmura matzah, but people, what we call generically shmura matzah, the stuff that costs $25 a pound, that's how you know, or $10 if it's less than $5, it'll be an amazing savings in Long Island. It was for $1.99. So in Canada, I'll say, so you can usually bring a raya from the price, but that's just a simon, not a siba. But either way, so they point out that the Rambam, based on the Rambam, that you should be really eating shmura matzah the whole Pesach, some have a chumrah. And the Vilna Gaon and the Tziv write, it's true the obligation the night of Pesach, and perhaps the whole Pesach, might only be one kizayis, but if you eat 2 or 3, you get a kiyam ha-mitzvah. The obligation might only be on the first kizayis, but according to many achronim and rishonim, the Baal Amor, perhaps at all 7 days of Pesach, that you eat shmura matzah, you get a mitzvah kiyumis of Shivas Yomim Tochal Matzos. So from Tosfos it seems that a mitzvah kiyumis isn't enough to push off aseh docha lo saseh, but the Ravid clearly disagrees and says it is. So that's another. But that's Tosfos' answer, that only the obligation of kazayis rishon pushes off the prohibition of chadash. If you stopped after one kazayis, you're okay. But we'll worry about the second, third, and fourth kazayis, and hence the Jewish people did not eat matzah on Leil Pesach. Another answer, or we'll see how far we get on it, there's a discussion from Rav Yitzchak Panovitcher, the Zecher Yitzchak, and he discusses a Mishnah in Psachim which talks about what are some of the details to fulfill your mitzvah of matzah the night of Pesach. So one of the conditions, it has to be from the chamisha minei dag, it has to be from the 5 grains, wheat, spelt, oats was a discussion, but we assume it's okay, etc. And it has to be roi lahachmitz. in order, one of the prerequisites to fulfill your mitzvah of matzah leil Pesach, it has to have the ability to become chametz. If this grain, and that's like say rice, we pass that it's not one of the five, and therefore something that doesn't have the ability to become chametz cannot be used for your mitzvah leil Pesach. So this halacha the Gemara talks about of matzah shel tevel. Tevel means something which wasn't tied. They didn't take off truma and meiser from this produce. So Gemara says you cannot use matzah shel tevel for your mitzvah. So the Gemara talks about what about chametz shel tevel? You make bread out of tevel. You know it's produce, but and you eat it on Pesach, or if you did eat it on Pesach, would you violate the issur of tevel, chametz, none, or both? Which door number 1, 2, 3, or 4? So the Gemara says you violate the prohibition of tevel, because Rav Shimon's opinion is ein issur chal al issur. That once something's prohibited, again it's a whole discussion in Chulin and Yeridea, but what it means simply is once it's prohibited, you can't have another prohibition fall on it. So since it started off at tevel, even though now it's chametz, meaning it's chametz and physically, so we see from this Gemara that a bigger chiddush, that not only does it have to physically be able to become chametz, but halachically it has to have the ability to become chametz, and that's why they couldn't eat matzah shel. Even it's true they could have made the matzah out of chadash, but chadash can't become, since it can't become chametz, it can't become matzah, and that's why they could eat the matzah in the midbar.